Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we have the latest from the live radar, run for the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. So the rest of this weekend and the start of this upcoming working week, we are going to remain pretty cold, but fortunately pretty dry as well. We still have this big area of high pressure that is dominating our weather, but it is going to slowly slip away early next week. Still, as I said, would likely be pretty dry, but there is the risk of more showers, especially further westwards, and it is going to remain pretty cold as the air is pretty stagnant. We are seeing a pretty big inversion taking place at the moment as we are dragging our air in from the south or southeast, which is a much drier and colder direction, as much of mainland Europe has had a very cold first half to January, just like the UK, but it's been more persistently cold there with their overnight temperatures. So we are dragging in all that cold air at the surface at the moment, and that's why it is really quite chilly out there and will remain chilly throughout the next kind of 3 or 4 days. However, as we get into the middle, the latter part of next week, we will see the Atlantic finally get unlocked. It is looking likely now we do see big areas of low pressure trying to push in off the jet stream, and it could go very unsettled or even very stormy at times. However, as we saw earlier this week, a lot of the models were showing a massive Scandinavian high. Now that Scandinavian high hasn't completely disappeared from the models, it's just not quite as strong as we anticipated, or some of the models anticipated earlier in this week. But it will still have an impact. It will still slow down the storm track, potentially distort the jet stream a little bit, and it could reduce the severity of these low pressure systems. But that is still a good week or so, maybe 6 days in advance, so there is still quite a bit of uncertainty with the exact positioning and intensities. But we are fairly sure now that easterly winds, at least in the next kind of 7 to 10 days, are off the cards, and it is going to look like the wind is going to be coming in from the west, but it will be a real battle, so it probably will stay pretty chilly, but we will see lots more rain and wind. So do remember, if you enjoy the videos, make sure you like and subscribe. Remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. And as you start on the live radar, calling this around 6:30 in the evening, and once again, it's pretty dry, a few bits and bobs of rain just off to the west of the radar, but really not too much going on. A lot of fog and low-level cloud around with this inversion, so we've got this really cold layer of air trapped at the surface. You see the surface temperatures today, where we are closer to the near continent, dragging in that cold air. It is another very cold night for much of England and Wales, very cold. Pretty mild across Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and for parts of Scotland, where we aren't seeing that cold air established, but it's parts in the north and the east a little bit more stagnant there. Again, perhaps a bit more of a southwesterly coming around the high there. So it does mean that these areas are slightly milder. But further eastwards and further southwards, that air is coming straight in from the near continent, where once again we're seeing widespread overnight frost, temperatures widely down to -5. We're dragging in that sort of air, and that means for us we won't be that cold, but we still probably will be around freezing, maybe below freezing, and just very chilly days. Nowhere near as severe as the start of the month was, where we were seeing close to ice days in places. We were seeing snow, temperatures down to -10 to -20. Nothing at that extent, but just generally below average cold winter days. Now, to go over to the latest UKV, you can see it over the coming days, not expecting much precipitation at all, just lots of cloud, a few breaks perhaps as we do head into Monday, but again, still pretty cloudy in most areas, and a few bits and bobs of drizzle could break out at times. A little bit more rain starting to appear there later on this week, and that is where we start to see the Atlantic getting unlocked. Not expecting major precipitation in the next 5 days, but you can start to see the high pressure slips away, and we start seeing more of these blues appearing. This is lower pressure systems out in the west starting to push in, and they'll make much more of an influence through Friday and Saturday next week, and they could, as I said, be pretty severe where they do occur. Now, if you look at the upper air temperatures at the moment, it is very mild today. However, that's not telling the full picture. As I said, at the surface, we're seeing very cold air starting to move in. And actually at the upper air level as well, the cold air will appear. Because, of course, if you give the ground long enough, it eventually does affect those upper air temperatures, and we can start to see homegrown cold air mass. And that's what we're seeing across Europe, and we're starting to drag that in, not only at the surface, like we have initially got, but at the upper air level as well. So we start to see much colder conditions, upper air, and you can see it is kind of homegrown as well. It starts to develop much more widely through Monday into Tuesday. And again, nothing record breaking, a couple of degrees below freezing, which is average, maybe slightly below average, nothing amazing, but the surface, it is going to feel very, very cold as we do head into the early parts of next week. The other big thing to look at is the dew points. That just shows you how dry the air is, and you can see the dew points down close towards freezing. So it's a cold, dry air mass, and the dew points are going to remain very cold over the coming days, perhaps even getting colder at times before slowly creeping up later on next week as we still remain in cold air, but the wind veers more from a westerly direction. Look at the max temperatures like this today for many areas in central northern England, not getting much above freezing, really cold with that low cloud and cold surface temperatures. So as I said, upper air temperatures are almost at 10 degrees, but the surface, because of this inversion taking place with the air getting dragged in from Europe, it is still very cold. Now this will continue over the coming days. Again, don't take these exact temperatures as gospel. They could be a couple of degrees either side, as it does depend on very local conditions like fog, low cloud. If you've seen a bit of sunshine, that will all make a difference. So look at these as kind of a rough guide to what you're seeing. But if it shows 4 degrees, it could actually be 6 degrees, or it could actually be 2 degrees. So do always take it with a pinch of salt in these sort of conditions. You can see through Sunday morning, widespread frost developing. Again, not down to kind of -3, -4. It could occur in a few spots, but mostly between that sort of -1 to 1 degree mark. So around freezing, but nothing too major for January. Again, into Sunday, widespread temperatures, 2 or 3 degrees for those same areas as today. And again, could only be 0 or 1 degrees in a few spots. Into Sunday night, another frost developing, perhaps not quite as widespread, but generally still all areas down to kind of 2 or 3 degrees or below. And again, into Monday, a very cold day. We do start to lose that continental flow. The temperatures start to rise a little bit, but still are average to below average, 3 to 6 degrees, and stays pretty chilly through Tuesday. Again, another frost potentially into the morning, and again the afternoon, widely around 2 to 7 degrees, so still chilly, and even into Wednesday, another frost occurring in some spots, and again 2 to 7 degrees, and then finally into Thursday, another chilly day, looking at again around that 1, 2, maybe up to 7 or 8 in the far southwest. So it is a very cold next 5 days, nothing record breaking, but a degree or 2 below average in most places, and it's going to continue this really quite chilly January we've had so far. Yes, earlier this week we did have a few days where it was much milder, but it is turning much colder now, and it does mean that I think this month, unless we see something drastic in the final week, it's going to come out as a really quite cold month. We're very interested to see the CET data at the end of the month. As I've said in prior videos, at the end of the cold spell on the 12th or 13th, I think it was, when I last looked at it in detail, we're at -2.4, 2.4 degrees below average, that is, with an actual CET around 1.4. I think it has crept up now to maybe 2 degree anomaly. That's -2 degree, but it could start to drop further if we do see these cold days continue over this coming week. However, that's all going to change as we do head later next week, where yes, it could remain chilly, but it'll be much wetter and windier as the Atlantic really gets going for the first proper time in 2025. Look at next week, you start to see Tuesday, Wednesday, we lose that continental flow, comes more from a westerly direction, but it's still chilly upper air temperatures, so at the surface it still remains reasonably cold, just not quite as cold as Sunday or Monday. Then you can see we see that Scandinavian high trying to build, but it's not strong enough. And instead, the jet stream powers up, a big low tropospheric polar vortex exits out of northeast Canada. We've got a very cold spell going on at the moment across North America, and that very cold plunge is fueling these low pressure systems developing in the northeast and part of Canada, and that eventually really spins up these lows for the UK. Now the first major low, perhaps next Friday, look at it, is very severe. However, you can see it doesn't make many inroads east, it actually heads straight north, and that's because it's coming up against the high pressure we have further eastwards. This latest GFS doesn't have that high too strong, but if we look at some other runs, that high is a bit stronger, and that low doesn't develop nearly as much. So it could be very stormy, but all eyes are on the pressure rise to the east, whether that will hold off the Atlantic flow. In the subsequent days, we see more quite big low pressure systems, but again, their main centres remain to our north and our west. Doesn't mean we're not going to see strong winds and heavy rain, but perhaps we will miss out on the most disruptive conditions. So we'll keep a very close eye on that. Eventually the Scandinavian high kind of breaks down and we do see a more classic westerly flow, but another breakout of potentially high pressure towards Scandinavia occurs at 384 hours, and again another battle does take off. I do admit though, I doubt we'll see anything major in terms of colder conditions unless we got rid of these big purple heights dominating towards Greenland and northern Canada. This is big lobes of tropospheric polar vortex, exceptionally cold air, and this combining with the mild mid-Atlantic air is just spinning up these low pressure systems. So until we get rid of that or disrupt that, I doubt, doesn't matter how strong a Scandinavian high signal will be, I doubt it'll be able to get going and actually dominate. It's too big of a battle. And as we've seen this week, it thought it could win out initially, but as many people have alluded to, it did eventually lose out. And you can see now it still plays some role, but nowhere near as significant. And we'll have to wait and see what happens into early February. Now, to compare to the latest GM, probably very similar. Eventually, low pressure starts to break through early next week, but it's very weak. And you see that high pressure develops towards Scandinavia. We see that really severe low trying to rifle Friday, but once again, it doesn't get pushed in, it stays further north and westwards, and that's because this high to our east is so much stronger than the GFS, and the most severe conditions could just glimpse the far west, but then head towards Iceland. Another quite severe low, it makes a little bit more progress, but again, the Scandinavian high is pretty strong and holds it off. And then right at day 10, the Scandinavian high is really having a go at pushing easterly winds our way. You can see this big cold pool that's to our east is really having a go at trying to push it towards us. If we look at those 200 HPA winds, you can see it's attempting to build this high here and circle those winds towards us. And you can see that with that wind gusts there, the 300 HPA winds there through Scandinavia coming in from the east, but it's coming up against this big lobe of the jet stream that's trying to just push westerly winds. So there's a possibility something colder does develop, but as I said, unless we broke up these purples and these blues, there is a low chance anything major could come off. But you can see it is only a matter of a few hundred miles away. That very cold air is sitting, and again, we'll have to wait and see. Now, to finish by looking at the latest ECMWF, unfortunately, only got out to 192 hours, and I'm calling this a little bit before the full run has come out, but broadly, very similar pattern. Low pressure trying to push in, has a bit more success this low as that Scandinavian high isn't quite as strong, so do still need to keep a very close eye on it, so it will depend on the strength of that high. And then again, more big purples developing. This looks like a really nasty low there, and again, the heights towards Scandinavia have dissipated away. They've transitioned much further eastwards into Russia, and that essentially means that the Atlantic is given full steam ahead, and that could turn into a really nasty low. Unfortunately, not a lot of the data has developed for it, but yeah, it could be a really horrible system there, so again, need to keep a very close eye on it. Now, to finish by looking at the latest ensemble, you see the upper air temperatures dropping quite substantially over the next kind of 24 hours, and then it's chilly over the next few days. You see, precipitation doesn't really return until kind of Wednesday, Thursday next week, and that's where precipitation does start to rise. You can start to see these little troughs and spikes in the upper air temperatures, so starting to see a classic zonal sine wave developing, mild sector, cold sector, mild sector, cold sector, repeating, and you can see they coincide that transition with precipitation spikes, so weather fronts pushing through. So you're seeing a classic westerly wind pushing in. It's not really a mild westerly wind, or we'd see this kind of pushed up a little bit further, but it's hovering around average, colder, milder sectors, equally moving through with those low pressure systems. So that's what we're seeing here for that period between kind of the 22nd and the 28th. Beyond that, still massive uncertainty, but that's generally what we're seeing now in that medium term. Short range though, very cold, and it does turn a bit milder when those lows do move in, but even then, not massively mild, still probably single digits at best. So even that final week of January, even though it is going to perhaps be westerly, still wouldn't expect it to be massively above average, still probably will be pretty chilly. And if you do look at the dew points, they're cold over the next few days, and then you can see up and down substantially into the future. So no massively mild dew points, so no huge mild sectors, but there are also some colder dew points. So again, we are looking to see some milder and some cooler areas of air. And if you finish by looking at the ECMWF ensembles, very similar, starting to again see that zonal sine wave, perhaps not quite as clear cut, but you can start to see those little dips and troughs, and you can start to see again precipitation spiking, starting to cluster. So the model's starting to agree when those lows will arrive. But of course, intensities, exact wind gusts, and sort of those specific details still yet to be determined. But for the next kind of 4 or 5 days, still expecting it to be pretty dry, really cold, especially the next couple of days before it starts to slowly turn milder, but still will be chilly, before eventually we do see something more Atlantic driven as we do head into the latter part of next week. So anyway, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.